everyone. Welcome. Thanks for coming out on a nice, brisk, late fall day. We're going to hear two presenters this evening. We've got author Michael Gabriele with us. And musician, songwriter Spook Handy is also joining us. As you know, this year, 2025, the Princeton Folk Music Society has been celebrating our 60th anniversary. And it's been quite a milestone for us, and we've been encouraged by your support in coming out to some of the concert events that we've been holding this year. This December event is our final one for the 60th anniversary year. And I'm honored in a way that joining us tonight is one of the founding members of the organization going back to 1965. Jim Floyd is here with us this evening. So because of Jim's work and others, this organization has been in existence for 60 years now. The way the presentation is going to work tonight is Michael will be giving his presentation first. And if you're not familiar with this book, he has it out on the merch table there. And of course, something nice to buy for the holidays. New Jersey Folk Music Revival, History and Tradition. And Michael will be speaking about that. His presentation is going to be about 45 minutes. Then we're going to have an intermission where we have refreshments and snacks for you. I do want to remind you, because we're in a church, the refreshments and snacks are not allowed in the sanctuary area, so please limit yourself to the lobby. Because the 60th anniversary year, we have tried to display our history. And if you get a chance to mosey around the church, there are various poster boards and pictures of some of the performers who have performed for us over these past 60 years. So I hope you get the opportunity to do that. Also, as a tradition, people have been donating magazines, books, recordings to us, and we like to spread the folk music amongst the community. There is a table out there of magazines that have been donated to us. And during the intermission, you have a ticket stub. When we come back, we'll be doing some CD giveaways, so please keep your ticket handy. Right now, I'd like to introduce author Michael Gabriele, and this evening's kind of a New Jersey-centric presentation in a way. Both Michael and Spook are New Jersey natives, and you know, we're here in Princeton, New Jersey, so I thought it was a good way to end the year and do a New Jersey-centric folk music presentation. So I leave it in Michael's capable hands here, and Michael Gabriele, please, warm welcome.
I'm a lifelong Jersey guy. That's all I write about is New Jersey. There's plenty to write about. Good evening, everyone. It's a big honor for me to be here tonight. Congratulations to the organization for its 60th anniversary. I think that's absolutely wonderful. I see a lot of baby boomers. We have no millennials or Gen Xers out there? No? What's the matter with these people? They don't want to come out here. They don't want to come out and hear live music. I don't know. Well, whatever. Anyway, my name is Michael Gabriele. I am an author. My publisher is The History Press. And you'll see their books online. You'll see them in bookstores. They're based in South Carolina. I've been writing books for them for about, I don't know, my relationship goes back about 17 years. I've written 5 books for them. My diner books are very popular. The news book is about colonial taverns. I've got all my books here tonight. And then I did the folk music book. When I do books, I'm always looking, I was a journalist by trade. That was my profession. I'm always looking for the story. See, my book, these are history books, they're nonfiction, but they're not academic books. They're popular history. I don't even know, is that a genre? I made it up, so. I'm always looking for the story. It's usually a human interest story. And I always want to know, how do things fit together? How does this happen and that happen? And all of a sudden, well, wait a minute, this came together. So I'm always trying to create the narrative. See, 50,000 words, I've been writing 500-word newspaper articles for a long time, but a 50,000-word book, it's a little different. And fortunately, I had a good editor who schooled me on this idea of, you need a voice, you need a narrative, you have to tell the story. So that's what I try to do in all my books. And with the folk music book, well, there was a big story to tell. And a New Jersey folk music book, some people they're sort of taken aback, and what do you mean, folk music? No, John Bon Jovi and Bruce Springsteen. I said, well, that's true, yeah, but there's a big folk music component here in New Jersey, and there's a story to tell. And so I sent my proposal to my publisher, and I said, I think I got a story here, New Jersey folk music. They said, what are you talking about? I said, no, there's a story, I guarantee you. So I wrote the book. So, and there's the cover of the book. But we should start, there's the story of folk music goes way, way back, but let's start with the history of the Princeton group here. So the next slide, please. As is the case for most things, good things happen at the YM and YWACA. So this is where, in fact, let me get my notes. This is where the Princeton group began. And it started with sings. Do they still do sings? Is that sort of gone out of fashion, the sings?
Right up to COVID we had them.
Sing, yeah. No more of that.
We're
Okay.
going to try and get it going again.
That's for, I don't know. So, Yvonne Aronson, does people remember her? She's not with us anymore, yeah. She had a pottery studio here in Princeton, is that right? And I guess she was interested in folk music. She organized the Sings. Jim Floyd was part of that. In the spring of 1964. Jim was a great source for me, so thank you very much, Jim. Appreciate it. The Folk Music Society officially began in the fall of 1965, but before that, there was a concert that the Folk Music Society sponsored in Princeton. And if you go to the next slide, there it is, Dave Van Ronk at the, it was the McCarter Theater? Is that what it said?
Alexander Hall.
Okay, Alexander Hall. Now there was some drama to this because, Dave Van Ronk, he was a big deal. But something happened, he had an accident and broke his arm, couldn't play guitar. So they were selling tickets already for the show. They said, oh my God, what are we gonna do? You can't have a Dave Van Ronk stand-in. So he said, well, don't worry, I'll come down and I'll sing and I'll get my friend Danny Kalb to play the guitar. And so the show must go on, and the show went on. Yeah, so anyway, so Dave Van Ronk, and then following that same year, that's when what does it say? It's the Princeton Folk Song Society? Okay, close enough. So, yeah. Folk music and folk revival music. People get into fistfights about this kind of stuff. They're like, I step outside. What's the difference? To me, I don't see a problem. Folk music is that traditional music. It's handed down orally, generation to generation. It was described to me by Angus Gillespie, who's a professor at Rutgers. Folk music's oral tradition, handed down over the generations. Usually it's an anonymous original source. Nobody remembers who wrote the song, but that's okay. A formulaic structure. These were poems. In fact, 150 years ago, it was all sung a cappella, no music. Simple imagery, and also had a utilitarian purpose to it. Back in the 1700s, the weavers would ease their drudgery by singing a little song, or the sailors on the tall ships, when they're hoisting the mast, they would sing a song to do that. So that's folk music. Folk revival music, that's a commercial outgrowth of folk music, right? It's designed as it's a business proposition. You make records, you do performances, you're on the radio, you're on TV, so it takes the essence of folk music and there's a revival to it. And this happens all the time in music, so I don't know why people get all bent out of shape about it. So maybe they do, I don't know. So the next slide. The Lenni Lenape had been performing folk music for about 10,000 years, mostly percussion, but again, it fits the definition. This music is handed down generation to generation. It's got a utilitarian purpose to it. They make their own instruments, the rattles and the flutes and the drums. These are performed for dances and for celebrations and harvest season. So they've been doing folk music for a long time. This is Chief Mark Gould. About 10 years ago, I was invited down to Bridgeton to their property down there, their land, and very honored to be invited to that. And they were doing a demonstration for the young children down there, and they were teaching them all about, well, the history of the Lenape. So, next slide, please. Folk music goes back way, way back, and this was a public domain image that I was lucky enough to download. This was by a Dutch painter, but it shows you folk music inside of a tavern or an inn. And you notice there's the fiddle player. Fiddle was the main instrument, no guitars. The design for the guitar had not been finalized yet. This is like in the late 1600s. And you'll notice everybody's having a good time, but dancing, the line dancing, if you wanted a boyfriend or a girlfriend, you had to learn how to dance, because there's all these like flirtatious dances going on, and hey, she's pretty, huh? So that was it. So dancing was a very important part of the folk music scene way back in those days. So the next slide. Now, see, to me, this is the essence of folk music. It's music for everyday people, everyday living, and it's part of life. You got the fiddle player, and the guys are dancing, and the little boys playing the sticks. When I do books, I'm also on the hook for 100 images, not only 50,000 words, but 100 images. So a book like this, I'm figuring out, how am I going to illustrate what went on back in these early days? Well, fortunately, we had genre artists, and these were skilled artists. They weren't interested in painting grand portraits. They didn't want to do landscapes. They wanted to paint everyday life. And so this is an example. The fiddle player's playing some tune, and they're dancing. Like I said, dancing's important. And this is folk music. This is music of the people, from the grassroots. So this is a good example of how folk music was. This is the Dance of the Haymakers, painted by William Sidney Mount. He was a Long Island artist. So, next slide. The Sacred Pine Barrens. I've come to love the Pine Barrens over these years. It's wonderful, wonderful down there. And the Pine Barrens in the 1600s and the 1700s, this is where all the outcasts and the people who didn't quite fit in, they all went to the Pine Barrens, and they developed their own folk culture and folk music and folk food and things like that. And so this was important down in the Pine Barrens. There's been some things written about the Pine Barrens and the folk scene down there, but goes back way into the 1700s. Next slide. For any of you musicians out there, any of you guitarists or banjo players or fiddle players, if you're looking for a great-great-grandfather, here he is, Sammy Giberson. This is probably the only picture that exists of this guy. Now, he appears in bits and pieces in old newspaper articles. Mid-1800s, Sammy was renowned, a legendary fiddle player, and he could play behind his back, and he used to do flips and things like that. And he confronted the devil once, and he said if the devil said, unless you play me a tune I've never heard of, I'm bringing you with me back to hell. So Sammy did have a song, and he played, and the devil said, well, never heard that one. You're free to go on. So Sammy Giberson was a pretty legendary character, and he was a real guy. And here's somebody that you can really look up to, and he was part of the early history of the folk music days. So I went down to the Pine Barrens. I looked for him. I couldn't find him. So. Next slide. Back in the early 1900s, there was what was called the guitar mania. And this is when the guitar started to become a popular instrument. And the design of the guitar was finalized by Mr. Martin, who moved out to Nazareth, right? So the guitar was almost like a novelty instrument at first. But then people started performing it on their front porches and up in the hills, and they would play music. And then there was some serious musicianship associated with guitar playing. And the virtuoso of the day from the late 1800s into the early 1900s was William Foden. Any guitar players out there? I think there's still William Foden method books that are floating around. Now, William Foden, he came from St. Louis. He moved to New Jersey because this is where things were happening. He lived in Englewood, and he would perform places like Carnegie Hall. And I found online magazines that reviewed some of his performances, and he was like, nobody had ever heard anybody play the guitar like this before. One is at a loss to describe Mr. Foden's playing. He's more than a virtuoso. He has invented and mastered effects unknown to other guitarists. Now, he wasn't a folk musician, he was a classical musician. Or he would play maybe he would play like American, maybe like Broadway songs or something like that. He was not a folk musician, but a guy like him, if you were in the audience, you'd be watching this guy play a guitar and say, whoa, hey, gee, I could do stuff with that. And then it slowly trickled down, and people started doing their own stuff with the guitar. Now, here's something I found interesting. Next slide, please. Now, take a look at this. William Foden became so popular and so in demand that this guild, the American Guild of Banjoists, Mandolinists, and Guitarists, I don't know if that organization still exists. I think they were based in Philadelphia. They put together this tour of William Foden on guitar and Samuel Siegel on mandolin and Frederick Bacon on the banjo. These were all world-class musicians. And they went out and they went with an orchestra and they were performing semi-classical music. Now, wait a minute. Mandolin, banjo, guitar, that's a bluegrass trio, right? So something's starting to happen here. Something's going on. Next slide. This is, I don't know, there used to be a mandolin orchestra in Bloomfield that I attended concert. This was popular back in those days, the guitar and mandolin orchestras. And this was popular even before they had the band shells and would perform, and they would perform there. These were usually local musicians, and they would perform at various functions. This was Henry Sparrow and his orchestra. They were in Jersey City, and they performed at weddings and events and fundraisers and things like that. Again, they were not folk musicians, but I think they showed the capability of what this kind of music could be and what they could do. And just imagine, people are sitting in the audience and they're taking this all in, and they're getting ideas. Folk music, mandolins, all right, guitars. Yeah, gee, I could play the guitar. I'm never going to play like this. So that's how it got started, I think. That's how it got started. So next slide. There have been actually a lot of folk revivals, but one of the big ones, the first one that I focused on was the folk revival in the early 1900s. And there were a lot of folklorists going around, especially in England. And Cecil Sharp was among the leading folklorists back in those days. And before this music or these poems, they were like, this is peasant music. Well, this is important. But sometimes some of these folklorists said, well, wait a minute, this is really important. These are people writing, they're doing poetry about their lives and where they live and where they work. Cecil Sharp, he was a very ambitious guy. He wanted to prove how important folk music was, music of the people. So he came to the United States in July of 1915, one of 3 trips he made, and he had this idea. He said, I'm going to prove that the folk songs from Scotland, Ireland, Wales, England, when people came to the New World, they brought their music with them. They brought their culture, they brought their clothing, they brought their food, they brought their music too. And he went down to Appalachia, right? Not Appalachia, you throw in Appalachia in Appalachia, right? He went down, he had a sponsor, he went down there, and he was doing field work. And he was transposing the song, and then people would say, yeah, this is what we've been playing all these years. And we said, well, you know what? This was a song pretty much based on a song that was from Scotland in God knows when. So he transposed all this, came back to Camden, New Jersey at the Victor Studios, and had the Camden Light Orchestra perform this. And you can, if you dig deep enough, you can find these recordings online. And so this is the revival. He's taking the music, the folk music that's been existing, and people have been playing, and he's giving it more credit, and he's expressing the value of this music. It's a revival. And when people started realizing what he was doing, he was a big proponent of this folk music become part of public education and community events. And people started paying attention, and they started getting interested in the music. They started having festivals and big meetings and concerts. That's where it got started. This was the revival. And so Cecil Sharp was a big part of that. Camden, New Jersey, it's a big part of folk music, as I'll be trying to convince you. Next slide, please. This is Camden, around 1929, and in the center, you can see that reddish building. That was the Victor Studios. The great Paul Robeson, 1919 graduate of Rutgers, he became involved in the Harlem Renaissance movement. And I mean, this guy, forget about it. He was a lawyer, he was a football player, he was an actor, he was a musician. He arranged a recital at the Provincetown Playhouse in Greenwich Village, April 1925. And there were some agents from the Victor Studios there. They heard him, and they said, oh man, we got to get this guy into the studio. His first session was July 16, 1925. He performed ethnic folk songs from all around the world, and he sung them in their language. I mean, Paul, come on. How good could you be? I mean, he's a hero. He's a hero. He's a hero. Next slide. There's Paul Robeson, football player, singer, actor. I got this. The people are very nice at the Alexander Library. They gave me some pictures of him. So, next slide. Now, some people have heard about the legendary field recording session in 1927, Bristol, Tennessee. Ralph Peer, who was the Victor A&R man, he's like a visionary, but he was also very keen. He understood not only music, but he also understood business. And he started to realize that there was a market for this folk music. And people liked the idea of this music that was kind of rough around the edges. It wasn't overproduced. It was original songs. And he said, you know, there's something here. We can make records, and people will buy the records. He went down to Bristol, Tennessee in August of 1927, came back with the Carter family and also with Jimmy Rogers, the father of country music. Now, you've heard that story, but maybe the story you haven't heard is that he said, come on, you're coming back with me to Camden, New Jersey, and we're going to record you, folks. And the Carters recorded they had their first session May 9 and 10, 1928. Will the circle be unbroken? That's where that comes from. Pierre, he was from East Orange, New Jersey. He was a Jersey guy. East Orange keeps cropping up in this research. I don't know. I can't get away from East Orange. He was a champion of this American roots music. I guess that was known, or ballads, as they were called. And he understood the talent, and he understood that there was a market. There was a developing market for this. Again, this is the revival. This is the music that's meant to be a commercial enterprise. Next slide, please. Woody Guthrie. I got this picture at the Tenement Library in New York. It's a press photo of Woody, and I had the original photo. I turned it around, and it's from a studio in East Orange, New Jersey. God knows what he was doing there in 1948. And so Woody Guthrie came to New York City in February of 1940. He was invited to perform at the Grapes of Wrath concert at the Mecca Temple in New York City, February 24, 1940. This, I believe, is where he met Alan Lomax and Pete Seeger. This is where they came together. Now, again, now it's RCA Victor Studios. They realized that there was something going on here. And the producer down there, his name was Robert Weatherald, he contacted Lomax. Lomax was this famous musicologist. They said, Alan, we need somebody to come down here. We want to record a ballad, a folk album. He said, I got just the guy for you. He just showed up here in New York. His name is Woody Guthrie. And Woody went down to Camden. Let's see. April and May 1940, signed the contract. That became the Dust Bowl Ballads. His first recording here in New Jersey. Not Oklahoma, not New York, right here in New Jersey. So, folk revival music, New Jersey. You get the picture. You get the picture. Woody also recorded. He went to the. His wife was a dancer at the Jewish Community Center in Newark. Who was telling me they had his wife Margaret for a teacher? Well, she was a dance instructor there, and she convinced Woody to come to the hall is not there anymore, but she convinced him to come to that hall and do a recording, do a concert. Well, a Rutgers student by the name of Paul Braverman had this archaic recording device called the wire recorder. He recorded the concert and basically had the machine in his closet for like 40 years. Never looked into it. They rediscovered it, and they said, hey, we can use this. This is probably the only full concert ever recorded by Woody Guthrie in Newark, New Jersey. And it was, they re-engineered it and they remastered it. Released in 2007, in 2008 won the Grammy Award for Best Historical Album. Woody Guthrie here in New Jersey. Next slide, please. The Pine Hawkers. They became pretty popular for a while. They were discovered by a folklorist by the name of Dorothea Dix Lawrence from Plainfield. And she was working with the National Folk Festival in Washington, D.C. Is that still going? Is that still happening, or is that long gone? I don't even know. It was every year they had the National Folk Festival in Washington.
I think it was on the wall, right?
I think so, yeah.
The Smithsonian.
Well, they had it in different halls. So she was part of that committee, and they said, Dorothea, we want you to find some real New Jersey musicians for us. So she, all right, I'll try. So she went down to the Pine Barrens, where else? And she was driving around down there, and the way the story goes is she stopped at a local post office, and she went into the postmaster. She said, where are some really good folk musicians here in the Pine Barrens? He said, go find the Bamber Boys. The Bamber Boys? Who's the Bamber Boys? Who are they? Well, they were the Pine Hawkers. Merce Ridgway Sr. and his cousins Walt and Bill Britton. They performed at the National Folk Festival in 1941. They got a lot of press and publicity. They became famous for a little while. they were doing radio broadcasts, and they did a tour of the New Jersey Shore one summer, just like Bruce Springsteen. So, well, sort of like that. So the Pine Hawkers, again, that's music coming out of the Pine Barrens. Good stuff. Now hold on, I'm not going to show you the picture just yet, but again, another story about the Pine Barrens. There were these brothers. They came from Sayreville. They worked at the Sayreville Brick Factory. George and Joe Albert. And they enjoyed hunting, and they used to like to go down to the Pine Barrens to do their hunting. And they would go back and forth. It's like in the 1930s. Finally, after about 10 years, they said, you know, let's buy some property there, and let's build a little hunting lodge for ourselves. This way we don't have to go back and forth every day. So they did that. And they were kind of friendly guys, and they wanted to have outreach to the community. And they used to bake apple pies for people, so people would know who they were. And they were amateur musicians. They were a fiddle player and a gut bass player. Is that what they call that? Gut string bass player. So they told the people, they all knew they were interested in music. They said, well, you know what? On Saturday nights, why don't you come to our cabin, and we'll all sit around and we'll play some music just for fun. Well, that went on for a number of years, and that became pretty popular and became known as the home place. And it was actually somewhat legendary. And they did this for a number of years, and word got out around New Jersey that, hey, there's these old guys who are playing folk music down in the Pine Barrens. Yeah, where is it? I don't know, somewhere. People would seek them out. And it was like it became like this big station for musicians in New Jersey. It was okay for a while, but then, troublemakers and drugs and drinking and rowdies. And finally they said, that's it, no more. This is over. This is over. So the brothers died, and that was 1973 that they stopped it. And they both died in 1987. And the home place, which would be this kind of this folk music jewel, was destroyed by vandals. And next slide. This is what's left of it. Not much. Those are the bricks from Sayreville. And I went down to the Albert Hall, and a man who, I was talking to them down there, they invited me to come down and do a program. And they said, boy, I said, I'd really like to go see where the home place is. He said, I can take you there. I said, you know where it is? He said, oh yeah, sure. And we drove into the woods along the sugar sand on the Pine Barrens. And we parked the car, and we're walking through the woods. He said, well, here it is. I said, where is it? He said, what's what you see on the ground? So that sparked another revival. People liked this idea that what the Albert brothers were doing. They wanted to keep the music down in the Pine Barrens alive. And so they started raising money, and they started getting donations. They started getting grants. And they built Albert Hall after the Pine Barrens, right? Albert Hall in England, Albert Hall in Waretown, get it, And Albert Hall opened on January 5th, 1997. And now it's a major spot on the national circuit. Now let's get into some interesting stuff, some intrigue. Next slide, please. My good friend Spook Handy is a disciple of Mr. Pete Seeger. And Pete Seeger is a legend in music, a legend in social causes, legend in environmental causes. This is a picture of him performing at Drew University in 1970. Everybody knows that he went before the House Un-American Activities Committee, and they asked him all these stupid questions, and he said, I'm not going to say anything. You have no right to ask me about my religion, my philosophy, where I perform, what I do. But why did they bring him before how did they know about this? Why did they bring him before the House Un-American Activities Committee? Well, exhibit number 1 was, next slide, this article that appeared in the Daily Worker, and I got the date, and I went to the Tamiment Library, I found the issue, and there it was. He was performing at a temple in Newark that was sponsored by the Essex County Communist Party. You know, what does it say? You know, feeling angry, get mad. And they were so. I said, Mr. Seeger, did you perform at this concert? He said, I'm not telling you what I do. So this was the justification for bringing Pete Seeger before the House Un-Americans Activity Committee, among other things, I'm sure. Well, anyway, they found him in contempt of Congress. They were going to send him to jail. He appealed, and he won. So, but he paid for it. He was blacklisted. Of course, they said, no, there's no blacklist. They went to blacklist. Come on, the blacklist. He could not perform. He still performed live, but he couldn't perform on network television, and that's too bad because. In 1965, ABC had this innovative program called Hootenanny. And all these musicians who were basically inspired by Pete Seeger performed. The second show was a live concert at Rutgers, but no Pete Seeger. They couldn't even mention his name. And so the musicians didn't like this. I think that the show only lasted a year or two. But, I mean, given what it was doing, it was pretty innovative stuff. So he couldn't perform on network television, but in the mid-1960s, there was a thing called ultra-high frequency, UHF, sort of a precursor to cable TV. I mean, I remember watching UHF television. My grandfather used to like the bullfights on UHF. And we had a UHF station here in New Jersey, WNJU, channel 47. Well, the producers at the station knew Pete Seeger's people, his producers. And they said, Pete, how would you like to come and do a TV show for us in Newark? There was a studio at the Mosque Theater. And he said, oh, yeah, sure, this is great. He understood the power of media, but he realized he was not on network television. So, on November 13, 1965, the program of Rainbow Quest debuted on UHF. And because Pete Seeger owned the masters, you can still find those CDs. You can go in a supermarket and buy them there. You can go to a music store. They're still around. So here he is sitting in Newark, and he's got Jody Collins and Johnny Cash and the Clancy Boys and Tom Paxton. They're all coming in. It was an hour show. And they come in, no script. They'd sit down and say, oh, how's it going? And, hey, you know, what's that song you used to play a couple years ago? Oh, it's this song. Oh, can I play it with you? And this is what they would do. And that was the show. 39 episodes.
You can see some of them on YouTube.
Yeah. All right. Next slide. I contacted a guy who lives in Bayonne. He was a young intern at this studio. And he said, you know, I've got one of the original program bulletins. This is a flyer he sent around. If you look on the right-hand side, you'll see Pete Seeger's show. And Zachary also had a program there, Disco Teen. Zachary's the coolest guy in the world. I don't care what anybody says. But so this was, and he said, would you like me to send you this flyer? I said, yeah, I would really like that. So I made a scan of it, and there it is. So that's what it was. The next slide. I saw the Bob Dylan movie, right, last year or the year before. I enjoyed it. It's a good movie, pretty accurate. I mean, it's got, you know, it had the Hollywood stuff in there. Okay, you know, the girlfriend and all that kind of stuff, and saying goodbye. But mostly, I think they were pretty much on target. They told the story. You know, Bob Dylan, he was no innocent character. He knew what he was doing. He knew he was coming to New York, and he knew he wanted to have a record contract. But he also came to New York because he wanted to meet his hero, Woody Guthrie. Well, this is when Woody was in very bad health. But Bob really didn't know that. So he found the address where the family lived in Coney Island. He went there, and they said, no, he's not here. You have to go to New Jersey and meet him. Now, according to the movie, he met Woody Guthrie when he was in bed at this Greystone Sanitarium. I don't think so. I don't think so. He met Woody Guthrie at the apartment of Bob and Sidsel Gleason. They lived in East Orange. And they were old friends of Woody, and Woody was already in the hospital. And they went to the hospital and they said, you know, Woody's our friend we've known him all these years. Can we take him home with us on the weekends? We'll take care of him, and we'll feed him, and I'll wash his clothes. And they said, yeah, sure, go ahead. You can imagine they couldn't do that now. So they started doing that. And then word got around that, hey, Woody Guthrie is in East Orange, New Jersey. Yeah, how do you get to East Orange? I don't know, I think you take the bus there or something. So that's what Bob Dylan did. And he met Woody Guthrie, 182 North Arlington Avenue. And I got the address because I called the East Orange Public Library. I said, do you have phone books from the early 1960s? They said, yeah. I said, can you look up Bob and Sidsel Gleason? And they say, oh, yeah. So I got the address. I Googled it. The building was still there. I rode out to East Orange, took a picture. So this is where Bob Dylan got his blessing from Woody Guthrie. This is where he kind of became Bob Dylan, East Orange, New Jersey, again, in New Jersey. So Bob Dylan, he won't admit it, but he's secretly a Jersey guy, I think. I think so. The next slide, please. Now, when Joan Baez, when she performed at the Newport Folk Festival, 1959, was that the first year, I think? She performed, again, almost like William Foden. She was like, nobody ever heard anybody like her before. The way she sang, the way she played the guitar. She was hot stuff. And she was gaining a lot of notoriety. She was becoming very famous real fast. And she performed at a sold-out concert at the Mosque Theater in Newark, November 24, 1962. Again, now wait a minute. Joan Baez, Newark, 1962, sold-out concert. Something's going on here. Something is in the air. This folk music stuff is starting to happen. That was also the same month she was on the cover of Time magazine, when she's kind of sitting cross-legged and she was playing the guitar. Next slide. The March on Washington. I got this button, a man who was the foreman for my father's construction company, Nathaniel Wallace. He went to the March on Washington. And when my father was closing up the office, I was there one day, I was looking around, he said, anything you want, take. I said, well, can I have that button? So that's an original button. So, okay, summer of 1963, Joan and Bob, they were invited to perform at the Camden Music Fair. And then they performed at Convention Hall in Asbury Park. Summer 1963, August, they went down and performed on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. But first they had to perform here in New Jersey. That was the warm-up act. So, next slide. Again, folk music, it's starting to happen. It's a lot of folk musicians are here in New Jersey performing. Bob and Marlene Levine, big folk music fans, musicians too, and they would go to all these festivals. And they said, you know what? We could have our own festival right here in Middletown. And that's what they did. And this is, they pulled out a poster from their archives. This was the first Middletown Folk Festival, June 28, 1968, kind of a precursor to other festivals that we're having around the state. It lasted until about the 1980s, and then it kind of faded away. They couldn't keep it up, and it was expensive and all kind of stuff like that. So, next slide, please. Now, this is Mr. Angus Gillespie on the right, professor at the American Studies Department at Rutgers University. He was also a professor, before that, he was a professor at Douglas College, which is now part of Rutgers or something like that. Douglas dedicated its 1974-75 school year it was the year of the arts. And so they had paintings and they had dance. So Angus, who was a folklorist and a folk music fan, he said, well, you want to have the music, you want to have the year of the arts, you got to have a folk festival. And they said, well, what's that? And he explained it to him. He said, okay. They gave him a $1,300 grant, and he started the New Jersey Folk Festival on the last Saturday in April 26, 1975. And he's pictured there. I used to go to these, and this is like maybe 10 years ago. The man on the left is Mr. Marion Hanna, who was the reverend and the pastor at Antioch Christian Church in New Brunswick. And just out of curiosity, he said, oh yeah, I used to sing gospel music. He was like the most famous gospel guy in the world. He did a concert in New York at the Apollo Theater, and Nat King Cole was there. And after the show, Nat King Cole took a young Mr. Hanna aside. My friend, you're the best gospel singer I have ever heard. So there they are, the two of them. We just celebrated the 50th year of New Jersey Folk Festival at the Davidson Pond Park in Middlesex County. And that kind of brings us up to date. Are we going to have another New Jersey Folk Festival? I don't know. After my book came out, I was invited to be on the executive board of the New Jersey Folk Festival, and we're having discussions now. Rutgers didn't want us anymore. Please don't get me started. But anyway, I've taken you all the way from the 1700s in the Pine Barrens to right up until 2025 at the New Jersey Folk Festival. So have I convinced you? I mean, yeah, there it is. Thousands of people turn out for this. Not anymore at Rutgers. And we got a pretty good crowd this past summer. But this is the story of New Jersey folk revival music. And there's lots of other stuff that I wasn't able to fit in. I wanted to kind of keep my program a little short. But this was the book that I presented to my publisher, and I'm very proud of it. And I think there is a story to be told there. So I'm very happy to be telling it to you here tonight. And I congratulate the society here in Princeton for their 60th anniversary. And I'm so happy that you all turned out for this tonight. You're a lovely audience. So I would like to say thank you. And I'd be happy to entertain any questions or comments you might have. Thank you very much. Any questions, any controversy? Yes, sir.
Neither a question nor controversy.
Okay,
You know that Paul Robeson was born in Princeton?
I do. And what's his name? Wouldn't allow him to go to Princeton, right? The president, Mr. That's the story I heard.
I know, and that's commonly said. My understanding from a book which I'll share with you is that his older brother William wanted to go to Princeton, and he didn't have it. Okay. The first black graduates of Princeton were in the late 1940s.
Okay.
And the University of Cleveland refused them in a way because they were Second World War Navy program guys, and so they sort of had to take them.
Yeah.
So before that time, an occasional person would apply to Princeton from the South, from wherever.
They sneak him by Woodrow Wilson.
And Woodrow Wilson, there was a letter that Woodrow Wilson actually wrote and signed saying that it's unfeasible
Yeah.
that any black student would be coming to Princeton in the foreseeable future.
Oh, that's nice. Okay, well. Yeah.
So to finish the sentence, apparently Paul Robeson wanted to go to Lincoln where his father and his brother had gone. And then Rutgers offered him a full scholarship and he went to Rutgers.
Very nice. Thank you. I saw a hand here. Yes, sir.
Just wanted to add that in the academic year 1962, 1963, both Pete Seeger and Joan Baez played in the Carter Theater.
Yes, and he performed a lot in New Jersey. Yeah. A word about Pete Seeger. To this day, he's still controversial among some circles. He was a communist. He was a troublemaker. All this stuff. Paul Robeson, you know, I don't even know if Paul Robeson ever joined the Communist Party. Pete Seeger was from 1942 to 1948. I don't think Paul Robeson ever officially joined but he was sympathetic to the cause. Yeah, they were troublemakers. They weren't, you know, they weren't patriotic. Well, guess what? Pete Seeger served with the Army Air Corps in World War II. Woody Guthrie was a merchant marine. Millard Lampell was a sergeant in the Army. And Paul Robeson used to raise money for war bonds. So were they patriotic? Yes, they were. Were they troublemakers? Yeah, they were. They were. Now, did they make mistakes along the way? I'm sure they did. I mean, I can think, Joseph Stalin, the Dear John Joe album, Dear John Doe album, again, big mistake. But, people say, well, they were troublemakers. Yeah, well, guess what? They were protesting. They were standing up for guys who wanted to form a union in a steel mill or an oil plant. They were getting their heads busted in. And they were protesting these horrific lynchings that were going on almost every day. And so, yeah, they caused trouble, good trouble. And when Paul Robeson, before they took his passport away, he would travel around the world and do these concerts, and he would give interviews, and he said things that the State Department didn't like very much. So, yeah, was he a troublemaker? Was Pete Seeger a troublemaker? Yeah. They made mistakes. Even Millard Lampell, he was interviewed in a magazine, he said, yeah, we were a little naive. We should have known better with some of these things that we were doing. We kind of took the word of the Communist Party for granted. But, it was a different time back then. Russia was our ally in World War II. The Communist Party was a legit political party back in those days. Not anymore. But, so that's what I got to say about that whole controversy and getting blacklisted and things like that. So, patriotic? Yeah, they were patriotic. So, any other questions that anybody might have? If not, I will again say thank you, and I believe we're going to have an intermission, and Spook Candy and I have a merch table. You can go there and buy wonderful things, holiday gifts, very nice, and I think they've got some goodies for you too. So thank you, everybody. Congratulations to the folks designing. Thank you very much.